Welcome to the Author Your Life podcast, where you can write a new script for your life and become the hero of your story. I'm your host, David McRae. You are the author of your life. Let's get started.
All you have to decide is what to do with the time that is given to you.
In my experience, there's no such thing as luck.
It is not our abilities that show what we truly are. It is our choices.
Before we launch into the podcast, I'd like to tell you about my book, Author Your Life, Become the Hero of Your Story. This is a book for people who are at a crossroads in life and want to make a fresh start. Judging by the fact that you're listening to this podcast, I suspect that you may well be one of those people. This book is going to help you to change your narrative and rewrite the scripts in life that are holding you back. This book covers the latest science and research showing you how to become the person you want to be and live the life that you want to live. I'd like to invite you to get this book not only because I feel it's a great book that's going to help you, but also it's going to support the podcast as well. I love podcasts, but sometimes all of those ads that you get can be really irrelevant and annoying when you just want to listen to a good piece of training or a good interview. So I therefore made the decision with my podcasts that number one, I wanted my podcast to be free so that everyone could listen to it. And number two, that I wasn't going to fund it through all these annoying and irrelevant adverts and commercials. Therefore, if you want to support the podcast and support all the things that I put out there for free, whether it be here on the podcast, my YouTube channel, other areas on social media, then buying a book is going to enable and help that process. So this is what we call a win-win scenario. By buying the book, you help to support my work and all the free stuff that I put out there, and you also get a really transformational book that's going to help you make those changes that you really want in your life. So if you feel you're someone who's at that crossroads in life, you're looking for a new direction, you're looking for a fresh start, then make sure you get this book. Author Your Life, Become the Hero of Your Story is available on Amazon in ebook, paperback, and audiobook. Whatever your preferred medium, it's there for you to go get right now. Hello my friends, welcome back to another episode of Author Your Life. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about why you aren't learning. Why aren't you learning? Why aren't you growing? Why aren't you progressing? Today I'm going to talk about the 3 critical criteria for why and how and when you learn. When you get these 3 criteria, that is when the learning is ingrained. That is when the change and progress you want will start to sink into your consciousness and start to sink into your life. You've got to have these 3. And so often people are wanting to do things, they're wanting to try things, they're wanting to be things without having ticked all of these 3 boxes. So what are these 3 criteria? What do you need in order to truly ingrain learning in your life? Well, the first thing you need is the right message. The right message. You need the right information presented in the right way. Because sometimes there's something that you know, but you don't really know it. An example that comes to mind all the time, we hear about obesity. We hear about exercise. We hear about eating healthy. These messages are banged onto us again and again and again. You shouldn't eat so much sugar. You shouldn't eat so much fast food. You should eat more fruit and veg. You should have 30 minutes of moderate exercise a day. You shouldn't sit for too long. We hear these messages all the time, but we still have an obesity epidemic. We still have loads of people who aren't just overweight, aren't just severely overweight, but are clinically obese. And even then, for people who aren't overweight or obese in terms of the scales, what's going on inside is still just as unhealthy as being that much overweight. But why do we have this problem when we hear this information all the time? Because we're hearing the same information in the same way. It's just become noise to us. In order to learn something, in order to ingrain something, we need to hear the right information, but we need to hear it in the right way, in the right manner. I'll give an example from my personal life. I know that environmental changes going on. I know that we have climate change. I know that we have pollution. I know that we're doing a lot of damage to the world. I know that we shouldn't be using so much plastic. I know that we're trying to cut down our use of plastic. We're getting rid of the straws, the cups, the plastic bags. But I heard a fact that really startled me and really started to make me think more about plastic. And this fact was that by 2050, all of the plastic in the oceans will weigh the same amount as all the fish in the oceans. And when I heard the information presented in that particular way, it made me think about plastic. It made me think about just how much plastic we're actually using and how much plastic we're throwing away. And it made me think of, well, if there's all those fish in the ocean, and then all that plastic to go with it, I could see it in my mind's eye. And it shocked me. And that piece of information presented in that particular way has caused me to think more about plastic, the way that I'm using plastic, and ultimately what I can do to use less plastic in my life and for myself, to reuse and to recycle plastic as well. So that's the first criteria. You've got to hear the right message. You've got to hear the right information. And for me, it was that particular stat presented in that particular way that was the right information for me. But hearing the right information is not enough. What you also need is the right messenger. You need to hear it from the right person. Just like with that obesity example, of the plastic example, I'm sure this information is not new to you. I'm sure that you haven't just woken up from under a rock and you found out that we have this obesity crisis or that we have this pollution crisis. You've heard this information lots and lots. And perhaps you've even heard some of these startling statistics, like 25% of the United Kingdom is obese, or that all the plastic in the ocean is going to weigh the same amount as the fish in the ocean. I'm sure you've heard this information before. You've maybe heard the information in the right way, but you haven't yet heard it from the right messenger. You also need to hear something from someone who you trust, someone who you look up to, someone who you believe in. Now, for most of us, we don't actually have the right messenger. And unfortunately, this is because a lot of the time, the people who give us messages in our life are our parents, our teachers at school, and the government. And it's sad to say that these three sources of information we often don't trust or believe. Our parents get on to us about something, we say, oh hey, you know what, we know better than you. The teachers tell us to do something, we say, you don't know me, you don't understand me. The government say something, and we say, oh, they're self-interested, they're looking out for themselves. Quite often these sources of information who are our most regular messengers are the ones that we least believe, we least look up to. Sometimes you have heard a piece of information 18 different times, but it's when a certain someone says it the 19th time that you believe them. It's quite funny how our parents and teachers have been trying to teach us lessons for long periods of our life, and we don't listen to what they've got to say. But then suddenly, we turn on YouTube and watch some self-proclaimed guru tell us the same thing, and because they are an influencer, a social media personality, then we believe them. And I hope very much that you guys have fallen into my trap and you are placing me as that guru, as that influencer. Now I say that in jest, but perhaps that's true. Let's face it, for my industry, personal development, motivation, positive psychology, we're all saying the same stuff 90% of the time. You go and click on any of the other suggested videos down the side of this bar with the other various practitioners and teachers in the industry, you're going to be clicking on some similar videos. 90% of the information that we all share in this industry is exactly the same. And don't believe anyone who tells you they're unique, they're different, because they're not. They have their own personal twist and their own personal slant, but they're not reinventing the wheel. Now, why do you come and watch me or listen to me as opposed to anyone else? It's not because I'm giving information that is that much different. There are some nuances, but the actual bulk of the information is pretty much the same as anyone else. Sorry to disappoint you. The reason why you might come and watch and listen to me, or watch and listen to someone else, a huge amount of the time is because there's something about us that you resonate with. There's something about us that you like, that you trust, that you connect with, that you believe in. And so myself or someone else that you listen to, they might be the right messenger. They're actually giving you exactly the same information, but it's them who you listen to. It's them who you follow. I had an experience of this with meditation. I'd been told about meditation being a good thing, and I'd heard it from a couple of different sources. I'd heard it from my school when we studied Buddhism. My dad had tried to get me into it. I had watched a guru on YouTube who talked about doing it. And each of these three people told me that meditation was good. And the information on meditation being good was overwhelming. But it wasn't until I was speaking with a friend and they said that they meditated that I sat up and took notice. Because they weren't the type of person I would have expected to say they meditated. And when they said they were meditating, it made me think, well, if they're meditating, maybe I should meditate. The particular way that they described meditation, how they did it, what its effects were, made me think, well, maybe this meditation thing is actually something that I should give a go. I had heard about meditation from multiple different sources. I'd had 3 different messengers, but it wasn't until I had that 4th messenger, who just happened to be the right messenger, that I ingrained and implemented that learning and began to do my daily meditation practice. So this is the second component you need. You need the right information, but you also need the right messenger. Now, the learning will only truly ingrain when you get all 3 criteria. And the third of these criteria is the right timing. The right timing. This could arguably be the most important of the 3. Because you can hear these things about the environment, hear these things about obesity, hear these things about meditation. But if you aren't in the right point in your life where this stuff makes sense to you, where this stuff relates to you, where you can connect with this stuff, you're not going to apply it. And I know for those of you who are watching this video right now, you might have 2 out of 3. If you're watching my channel, listening to my podcast, the information that I'm giving you might be presented in the right way, where you say, okay, I get it now. Oh, I see why this is really good. I might be someone you consider to be the right messenger. You're listening and saying, hey, David really knows his stuff here. Or, I really understand where David is coming from. I really connect and resonate with David. You might have the right information, the right messenger, but if you don't have the right timing in your life, perhaps all of the things that you're listening to on this podcast, through this YouTube channel, you haven't actually implemented. You haven't done anything about it. And the reason why you haven't done anything about it is not because you're a bad person, not because you're a failure, it's because you haven't had the right timing in your life. Sometimes something needs to happen to our personal circumstances before we awaken something within, before we truly understand the wisdom of a particular piece of training, a particular piece of teaching, a particular concept or idea. If we're talking about obesity earlier on, you might have the right information presented in the right way, you might have the right people telling you about it, but it's not until you're diagnosed with diabetes that this really comes forward for you, where you really get why you need to do this. You really get why it's so important to look after yourself. That might be the timing that's required. For me, again, to illustrate with a personal example, I'd been learning about psychology, I'd been learning about motivation, I'd been learning about writing, how to be an author for several years. But I wasn't really putting it all together. I wasn't using it to the best of my abilities. I wasn't taking that wisdom and fully maximizing what I'd learned and what I knew within me. It wasn't until, as many of you know, I lost my dad to cancer, that this whole journey started for me, where I started looking at the things I'd been learning, the things I wanted to be, and I said, now I need to actually do this. Now I need to go out there and share this information in the world. Now I need to actually start writing books. Now I need to get up there and start teaching people, start educating people. I need the right circumstances to come along and ingrain that information for me. I needed to have that 3 out of 3 before I started on this journey. And that might well be the same for you. You too might need that 3 out of 3. You've got the information. You've got the messenger. The circumstances need to come and really make this stuff apparent for you. Really make this stuff true for you. Now, a little caveat here. I'm not offering this up as an excuse, because so many people say, I'm not going to start this because it's not the right time. I'm not ready. I'm not prepared. I don't know how to do something. This is not to be used as an excuse. Say, well, I was watching this video from David the other day, and he said that we need these 3 things, and I've only got 2 of them. I don't have the right circumstances in my life, so I haven't properly learned this and ingrained this, so it's all right for me not to do it. This is not a cop-out, guys. This is just stating the reality that it may take a certain set of circumstances to truly ingrain a certain type of learning and knowledge in you. But if you do only have that 2 out of 3, you still need to make a start. You need to start implementing that knowledge, using it, whatever it is that you know, whether it's about looking after yourself better. You need to start looking after yourself better. And maybe through the process of engaging in an exercise regime, starting to eat differently, something is going to come up in your life where you really understand why this was important. Perhaps you have a scenario actually because you've been working out, because you've been eating healthier, you are able to avert some crisis. Your sibling, very similar in age and lifestyle, gets a disease and you didn't. And you can see, hey, you know what? The only difference between me and my sibling was a couple years ago I started to take my health more seriously and I started to look after myself. And if I hadn't, well, maybe I'd have the same thing that they had. That is how the circumstances can come into play. The circumstances don't have to be there to start things off. But when you truly want to ingrain something, you do need those life circumstances. That's when you'll really understand why you should be doing something or why you're doing something you're already doing. So that third excuse is not a cop-out, it is something that comes along and helps the learning process, but perhaps it helps the learning process when you've already begun. So folks, this is what you need to truly ingrain learning. And if you feel like you haven't been learning, you haven't been growing, you haven't been progressing, it's probably because of these 3 factors. You haven't quite heard the right message, you haven't heard it from the right messenger, and you haven't had the right circumstances in life. If you need to learn something, then start trying to explore each of these 3 areas. If you're looking to start meditating, but meditation has never really appealed to you, it's never really connected to you, then try to look at meditation in a different way. Find out different things about it. If you've looked at meditation from a very spiritual point of view, start looking at it from a more scientific point of view. If you've looked at it from a very scientific point of view, do the opposite and look at it from a more spiritual point of view. Looking at your messengers, speak to different people, find out more about it. If you've just been listening to the academics about meditation, go and speak to the monks. If you've just been listening to the monks, go and speak to the professors. These are the ways that you can understand and manipulate these 3 criteria in order to help ingrain and enhance your learning experience. So folks, I hope you've enjoyed this episode today as always. I look forward to sharing more with you in the future. But until then, remember that you are the author of your life. You hold the pen and you can write whatever script you want for yourself. I'll speak to you soon. David. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. If you enjoyed this episode, I would appreciate it hugely if you could head over to iTunes and leave a rating and review for the podcast. With your review, please be as honest and detailed as you can be. Because with honest and detailed feedback, that helps me to adapt and grow this podcast to most serve you, the listener. Also, if you enjoyed this episode, then make sure you subscribe to the podcast. That way you aren't going to miss any of the future episodes that we've got lined up for you. Until next time, remember that you are the author of your life. You hold the pen, and you can write whatever script you want for yourself. So go out today and write yourself a beautiful story.